what the board will need to approve.
Yeah.
Yeah. If there's a material change in the contract or any of the agreements we have with our contractors, vendors, consultants, then this will have to come to the board. I've said that before, repeatedly. I repeated it here.
Okay, I didn't understand why you had to turn off your microphone to say it.
Because you have to turn off your mic so that the other person can be heard.
Okay. Okay, and then I guess the next question is where we go from here. When do you expect to have that contract redrawn up? And then answers to the questions about exactly how much concrete's going to be removed, and therefore how much dust could be brought up, and then drill down on whether or not you can actually do this within 15 to 20 months.
Well, we're not there yet on when the contracts will be coming before the board, because we haven't concluded renegotiations on all of rescoping or anything else. Once we have that, that will absolutely come to the board. We're looking to do it expeditiously. And additionally, that's why we want to bring in this third party, and the board made some very good suggestions about how we get that done. We will do that expeditiously, seek some advice from the board, bring a few names back to the board, select one, and then get going, because we don't want to drag this out.
Not by next week, though, right?
Tomorrow. No, not by next week.
So I just had a question. There was a lot of talk today about the independent review and who will be in charge of picking, who's on that independent board. And last week, Andy Byford was talking about his independent review and what he wants to do and make sure that he has a complete sign-off on that. Mm-hmm. So now, are there going to be 2 and possibly 3 independent reviews? There might be one by Andy Byford, one by the management, one by the board, or will there be 2? And
no, only one. Only one.
So Andy Byford is no longer going to do his own.
Let me answer the question this way. Andy Byford is a strong and very important and essential part of the leadership of this agency. We value him, respect him. I think that's a view shared by the writing public throughout. But let's be clear about something. The board hires. The board is responsible in a fiduciary way for all of these things, and it's appropriate then that these things come directly to the board, and that's what we're doing. And Andy understands that. By the way, he also understands we appreciate that, this has to get done. I mean, we're all on the same team here.
So he will have no role in, he said it was very important to him to be able to put his stamp of approval on this and give that to the board. So he will not have that role anymore. He will not be.
Well, we certainly want to hear his point of view and have him tell the board that. But let me tell you something. I'm going to be very clear about it. Somebody's going to make a third-party review, that comes directly to the board. Or else, what are we around for?
Couple of questions. Number one on the line. Don't worry. Oh, I'm sorry.
Can I get the mic? Thank you. All right. Why was Andy Byford sidelined? I'd like him to ask if he, I don't know if he's here, if he personally objected to the change in the line of accountability on this project, but if he can't answer him for himself, why was he sidelined?
He wasn't sidelined. The board
Okay, let me rephrase. If you don't like my word, let me rephrase. Why was he removed from the line of accountability and oversight on this project?
He's not.
So you have Ronnie Hakeem is going to oversee the operations. You have Jan Lieber overseeing the construction.
Right.
Where's Andy?
I think we described that. Andy is responsible for, among other things, running the biggest rail system in North America. Second, on the L train, he's responsible for service, communication with customers, and all of the other things, alternate service plans that are involved in the L train renewal. But let me be very clear again. This is the board's responsibility. The board. We have a fiduciary responsibility to evaluate this plan and to rule on it. So, very frankly, Andy understands that. We all understand that, and I certainly understand that as a member of this board.
And there were 2 issues raised here from one of the WSP members, Michael Abrahams. He said the polymer is flammable and it could melt and give off fumes, and that, and we actually haven't heard this quite stated so explicitly, but that a full rebuild will last you a much longer time, and so far this plan with the polymer and the racking system will give you 50 years of life. Two of those things have not been explicitly said, discussed publicly. Can you discuss why New Yorkers should be concerned these are reasonable issues that can be dealt with rather than serious safety concerns?
All right.
Yeah, Dan, first, the 40 to 50, you got to give the microphone up. The 40 to 50 years is consistent with what the dean said on January 3rd, 21. Mike Abrahams also said that there was a cementitious, and I'm not pronouncing it right, cementitious, thank you, John, layer that could be put on top of the FRP. And by the way, we're exploring FRP and other ways to restrain and fortify this. And as he said, that review is underway with the deans and with various suppliers. But a layer could be applied to make sure that it did not go on fire in the event of a fire.
Why wasn't all this discussed when we were here talking with the MTA officials and WSP? It wasn't meant, thank you.
See, it wasn't mentioned until today. So why are these critical, I mean, flammable, right? A flammable material, a new lifespan that's much shorter, if by half. I just want to know why we didn't get...
Not the case.
Not the case.
The lifespan that was described when we met with you all a week or so ago was 40 to 50 years, which is consistent with what the dean said on January 3rd. They also said, actually, Professor O'Rourke and others have said that it could exceed that, but that was an estimate that they were comfortable making at the time.
And that is reliant on the degree to which we properly maintain this application. That's important.
And so when he says it's not as advantageous as a complete replacement, how should we weigh that in the public? And forget expertise, just, it's a pretty clear statement. What should we make of that? It's not as advantageous as a complete replacement.
Look, there are trade-offs, and one of the trade-offs is public inconvenience. One. Two, removing more bench wall than is required introduces risk, right? It can't be done with a jackhammer. It's got to be done by hand. It creates vibrations. There are all sorts of trade-offs. And the process that the dean's engaged in and the process that's going on now is weighing those trade-offs and coming up with a project that is safe, can be implemented in the 15 to 20 month period, and does not require a complete shutdown. That's the process we're going through.
I think in a larger context, everyone's readers and viewers need to know that this is a decision being taken not lightly and out in the open. So we're discussing these things here in full public view so everybody knows the variables that we're dealing with. So you heard, for example, the coating on the cable, carbon-based versus glass-based polymer. That's that's pretty high-level stuff for most people. I'm not forgive me, I'm not an engineer, so I don't, I can't make a judgment on it. But I think it's important to discuss this in the public, especially in front of the board, so that we have access to all the variables that we can.
Is it a must-have to start by April? Do you fear bench wall crumbling onto the tracks if you don't do this by April, or can you push it off for more?
I don't know how to answer that question, but I think Mr. Jerry does.
Mr. Jerry, thank you.
Oh, Lord.
Just a couple of things. There are many different types of FRP, and so the material that will be selected will meet the appropriate code requirements for smoke and so that it is not being placed in a situation where it's melting. Now, there are a number of different options that were discussed in the presentation, which includes fiber reinforced polymer. It also includes a cementitious material, and Mr. Abrams discussed that there are ways of making this fire resistant. And the other option that's being discussed is a bar. And so we talked about these work groups. These work groups are working through a number of these issues. The great news here is that we have options. And so that's what will be proceeding. I want to go back to the discussion, and Mike was, right to say about the full replacement, but we're not doing a full replacement, right? What we're talking about here, and this was discussed, and so I was one of the few people that were around where the peer review panel was deliberating or asking questions and so on. There are options, and as Mr. Foy, President Foy had discussed, there are options. One of the options that the peer review panel discussed, and really to address, one of the issues that you all keep bringing up, and rightly so, is managing the silica. And so one of the options that was discussed was removing the bench wall since it serves no function, and moving all the cables up onto the tunnel liner. And so one of the options would have been simply remove all of the bench wall. Another option is to fortify it so that it can stay in place and last a long time. And the third option is to simply remove. And so what we opted to do as a group in discussion and collaborating was do a mix to kind of take advantage of all the different options that we had out there. Certainly another option is to completely remove the bench wall, and then the trade-off is that we're back most likely to a closure. And so what we're trying to do is balance the trade-offs.
Next question.
So why should sort of the public have any faith in the longevity of the new solution if it's dependent on the MTA's ability to properly maintain it, given the MTA's maintenance record writ large?
Look, that's a fair and honest question. We have to maintain it. We have to do what we can. In any other application that we're involved in, we have to be careful about what we do, and we owe the public a full explanation. It is fair to ask, why should anybody believe you're going to maintain it properly? You just got to know this tunnel is so important. This application is so important. We believe that we have a fiduciary responsibility. Among those things is a duty of care, to ask the right questions and to be convinced in the right answers. So we'll be asking these questions about maintenance. And that's where Andy Byford comes in, and he's very, very important part of this team, because his shop will be the one be in charge of maintaining this.
My second question is, because of some general squeamishness about a long-term shutdown, there's not going to be, it seems like, a long-term shutdown. What does that bode for the MTA's ability to sort of rapidly update its signaling systems, a process which is likely to necessitate long-term shutdowns?
I don't know. We're looking at that as well. As you know, we're looking at alternate technologies to try to avoid CBTC, because that takes a long time to install, to prove, to get the software for. You know the travails of CBTC, and not only the MTA but in other places. So we're working on that very, very hard.
Two questions. First, why was this project moved from within Transit's purview to capital construction and Ryan Haber's purview? What was the purpose of that?
Well, first of all, the entire review of this, the third-party review of this, is a board responsibility. Let's be clear about that. We're not shirking our duty to know, our duty to ask questions, our duty to oversee this. In fact, we're affirming and asserting it. The other important thing to understand is that while we're doing that, we owe the public a full reckoning of what the variables are. So they've got to see what we're considering, and that's why doing it in public, at the board level, in a transparent way, is the best way, I think, to approach it, unless anyone thinks otherwise. Please tell me.
With all due respect, that doesn't answer the question. The question was, Transit was running this project up until today when we received a press release saying that Capital Construction is now running it.
Well, I asked Capital Construction to do it because it brings more technical resources to the table. They have a lot of engineering know-how, a lot of planning know-how. Not to say that Andy doesn't, but Andy's, I said before, I don't want to be repetitive. He's running the biggest rail system in North America. He's got a lot of stuff to do, particularly with the L train. So his plate's pretty full. It's the board's responsibility to do this. I've asked General Lieber, who runs MTA Construction, to really take a hands-on look at this and have Ronnie Hakem, who knows the ropes as well or better than anybody else, to be the day-to-day person on it. And they've graciously accepted that responsibility.
And the second question relates to...
Let me ask Janet to come.
What I would just say is, it's really not a black and white, one or the other situation. With Cortlandt Street Station and a couple other projects, we've actually developed a pretty thoroughgoing collaboration where what Andy and I like to do is to kind of create a special project team that draws from both of our organizations and the consulting world to do something that's a little different, to create not just have organizations that are already stressed with a huge capital program, which certainly Transit has, but to create a unique project structure. A project of this size, complexity, and challenges, I think merits it, and Andy and I were actually excited to look at this anew from that standpoint.
And the other question has to do with the ongoing maintenance that has been referenced a few times that this tunnel will need to make sure that the fixes being put in stay in place for decades. I mean, what kind of maintenance are we talking about here? How disruptive will that be on an ongoing basis to riders in the years and decades to come?
Part of that is going to require the final design that's being worked on right now, right? So there's the smart fiber optic monitoring system that we think will be a key component of how we will continue to monitor the existing bench wall. But there are other things that we know we have to maintain in that tunnel. The track, third rail. So all of those components, the signal system, the new power that's being put in. So we are now going to have a project where we're actually going to leverage for the first time the CBTC investment for the L, where we're going to be able to increase throughput in the tunnel. All of those things require maintenance. I think the one thing that Transit, New York City Transit, and the MTA at large has said is we've held the mirror up and we know we need to invest in maintenance and state of good repair, and we're committed to doing it.
Bye, Antoine.
I have two questions too. The first is, and this was said, but if you could just repeat it to make clear, I think it was a consultant. So how long is this new plan projected to last? I know the original plan was 100 years. How long will this? I know they said it won't be as long, but just so we can make it as clear as possible for our readers and viewers.
Let me, because I was around for when 100 years was injected into this conversation, and that was 4 years ago. And it was injected into the conversation 4 years ago in the following way. It is my hope it will last 100 years. Not in the contract, it's not in the guarantee, it's not in the warranty. And in fact, when things like Superstorm Sandy's occur, you can throw that out the window. Let me give you an example. South Ferry Station, we had just fixed it. It was a couple of years old, right? It needed to be replaced again. So you can't account for those things. The real issue here is how well you maintain it. And we're committed to maintaining it properly. These are not new, untried technologies. These are technologies that have been tried and utilized successfully in other applications, on other rail properties, in New York, in America, and throughout the world. first time we've integrated it in this way, and we're looking forward to doing that, but maintaining it properly.
So it's correct to say that this new plan will not last as long as the other one, because that is what the consultant said?
No,
There's some
because
confusion out there.
I just explained to you that the 100-year thing was somebody's hope 4 years ago that it would last 100 years.
No, that's an objection, hold on.
Yeah.
Replacing in kind the existing bench walls.
Well, we're not putting any cable through the bench walls anymore. We're using, I'm sorry, did you?
Frank, it seems like you're misrepresenting what former MTA officials have said in published reports.
Show me how I'm misrepresenting.
There is proof, there have been studies that say when you rebuild a bench wall, you get between 80 and 100 years. Now, I know you're citing one specific example, but you're telling me that experts who talked to reporters and said there's proof out there that replacing bench wall wholesale can last a long time, 80 to 100 years. You're telling me there's no independent study?
No, I'm not telling you that at all. Are you assuming that we're running cable through the bench walls and those conduits anymore? No, we're using them only as bench walls.
Right.
Only as footpaths. That's it.
I understand that.
That's it. So,
I just want to make sure that you're saying is that was the whim of the MTA. Was this the
No.
whim of some MTA official when it's not, right?
No. We're talking about the entire project lasting 100 years. Let's be very careful about this.
Guys, we're trying to get everybody to get a question. Can we move on? You had a
That was the hope. That was the hope of somebody who was speaking on behalf of the MTA, that the entire project would last 100 years. Not that the bench wall would last 100 years. Not that the conduit would last 100 years. Let's be really clear about what we're talking about.
So I'm just so clear, so we don't get yelled at by the MTA press office when we say that you can't tell us how long this new project will last for this summer. There could be a hurricane next June or next August. I mean, you can't give a timeline, so.
But the engineers like to.
We did not give a time.
Yeah.
Really?
Come on.
I carefully, in my statement, did not give a time, largely because what the chairman said, it is completely dependent, longevity is completely dependent on your maintenance.
A couple of Paul D'Arienzo, WBAI radio. A couple of quick questions. The first one is, how long, this initial project before the changes were announced a couple of weeks ago, how long did it take to plan that? How long did the whole planning take? Yeah. No, that's the first question.
How long did the whole plan?
Project up till the change.
There was a lot of that plan. Most of it was something we had already done in Montague Tunnel, so that was fairly straightforward. The mitigation plans, alternate transportation, that took a long time.
Okay, and the second question I have is, are you aware, because I come from a family of engineers, that any engineer, and I know those speaking here, will tell you there's always a problem when you make a very fast change on a major project. It could be disastrous. I bring up 3 Mile Island as one great example of that.
Well, hopefully we're not using plutonium in any of our applications.
Oh, God.
I didn't know that was a question.
En español. Señor Ferrer, hubo un intercambio con la comisionada de transporte en el que parece que no toda la Junta ha tenido oportunidad antes de hoy de revisar el plan. No, yo sé que no están votando, yo sé que no lo han aprobado, todavía tienen que hacerlo.
El propósito
Pero
de...
estuvo sentado junto a Jobo cuando lo presentó.
El propósito de esta reunión fue simplemente revisar los planes, revisar lo que tenemos en la mesa hoy en día y hablar del futuro, planificaciones, cambios en el contrato, en los contratos con los ingenieros y otras compañías que están trabajando juntamente con nosotros.
Chairman Ferrer, also if you allow me in Spanish. Este plan es seguro, es algo que quiero preguntarle respecto a si hubo una reacción al reporte que salió en el periódico esta mañana. ¿Es este plan seguro para los usuarios?
Y también, ¿por qué preferir un plan que, según han dicho los mismos testimonios, tendría o duraría décadas a comparación de otro plan que hubiera durado casi un siglo? ¿Por qué elegir uno sobre el otro y si es necesario?
Bueno, su primera pregunta es excelente. Entender los factores del plan, entender lo que debemos hacer con la reconstrucción de varias áreas del túnel. Entender eso es importante para la Junta y para los ingenieros y para el management de la MTA. En el contexto de la duración del túnel, hasta los ingenieros no saben y no pueden garantizar y nunca han podido garantizar si el túnel iba a durar o va a durar por 100 años. Eso es imposible decir, pero con mantenimiento, con el equipo correcto y apropiado, vamos a tener un proyecto y un túnel que sí dura.
Back to English and bench wall. Can you explain again, just explain in detail how the MTA decided 60% of the bench wall could stay where it is? And related to that, on what other MTA project has bench wall with silica dust been removed on the weekends and work and trains have resumed again on Monday?
The MTA didn't decide that. We're going to be very careful about the language we use here. We did a preliminary investigation and testing of the bench wall. There has to be follow-up testing on this, make sure what stays, what goes. If the determination is in the neighborhood of 60% can remain, that's fine, without any intervention. That 40% is divided in 3 parts, like all gold. That which has to go, that which has to be fortified, and that which has to be watched. So that's the idea of the fiber optic early warning system, as well as going back in and making sure that we're correct on our assessment of the integrity of the bench wall. But that bench wall is very important, not because it's going to carry cable anymore, but because we don't want it to fail and fall onto the right-of-way.
Last question.
If you could help with the timeline in terms of how long it takes to get a consultant, how long the report takes, and at the end of the day, do you expect the work will begin April or perhaps when?
Well, that's a really good question. That's something we're grappling with right now. We want to expedite this. We want to do everything we can to do it in a fair and transparent way, but also get this project underway and not lose any time. You know, a lot of people's livelihoods and their daily living depends on this. So we want to do it right. All I can tell you is we're coming back to the board, as you heard me say, I think, to the board today, that we'll be coming back with recommendations for the board to decide on a third-party engineer to review. And we're going to do that quickly. We're not fooling around with that. We want to move this project along. We want to do it safely. We want to do it well. We want to do it expeditiously too. I think so. I am told it is, but we'll know that better in about a month.
That's the last question. Thank you.
This is a non-L-train question for the acting chairman. I want to hear about any measures you may have taken to reconcile any potential for a conflict between your private sector work and your role with the MTA, whether it's consulting with JCOPE, the MTA Ethics Council,
Question
votes,
by timing to ask.
Yeah, I've asked JCOPE and Ethics Council, and as you may know, I've taken a leave without pay from my job. Let me repeat that, a leave without pay. My wife already knows, and she's not too happy about it. Like that, I'm uncompensated.
Thank you.